Good afternoon, and thank you everybody for joining ThreatX's live Q&A, talking with our experts about malicious bots and how attackers use them to create more sophisticated multi-mode attacks. We've purposely designed this webinar to be as interactive as possible, so we'll stop along the way, answer questions, maybe even bring people up from the audience to ask their questions themselves, and to really be as interactive as possible. So with that, let's hop on in and let's meet our experts. So today, helping me lead our session is Neil Weitzel. He's our SOC Manager here at ThreatX. He's joined us with 15 years of incident response, vulnerability management, and pen testing experience. Neil equally enjoys giving back to the information security field by teaching others about pen testing and supporting cybersecurity courses in his free time. So Neil, feel free to hop on and say hi.
Hey, hi. Glad to be here, everybody. Really excited for this discussion.
Awesome. Second, we have Jacob Cardinal, who works alongside Neil in our ThreatX SOC as a SOC 2 analyst. He's worked in the past in software development, creating cybersecurity solutions himself, but he's also been a great helping hand in remediating advanced malware and even large scale, coincidentally enough, botnet attacks. So Jacob, feel free to hop in and say hi.
Yeah, hey everyone. Looking forward to talking about some of the bots. Got some fun facts to share with y'all.
Awesome. Lastly, my name is Tanika Faro. I'm a product expert who's worked in cybersecurity for the past 10 years in API and application security, as well as automation and incident response. And really excited to be talking to the team today. So with that, we're going to start off our session today really level setting and talking about what is a bot before we go into some specific bot examples. So really, at its essence, a bot is a program that operates as an agent over a network and really automates specific tasks. Some examples of bot tasks that could be automated could be buying brand new Xboxes that are available on Amazon or the other Walmart websites. Could also be sneaker bots that we're trying to gain access to. But also bots can be used to automate malicious requests like flooding servers for a classic DDoS attempt. Now, a botnet is simply just a collection of these malicious bots working together towards one common attack goal. So let's go ahead and let's dive into one of those real life examples look like.
Yeah, so I'll take over here. I just wanted to mention quickly, like one of the first bots I've ever interacted with was probably when I was younger playing the MMO. Definitely creating some bots or running bots to have my character level up while I was sleeping. But nowadays botnets get a lot more complicated, and I just picked out a few real world examples of some botnets that we're currently seeing in the wild. Just the other day, Cloudflare actually published a piece on the Mantis botnet. They named it after the mantis shrimp because it's a tiny little creature, but it has enough power in its punch to break a human finger. In this case, it's something similar. There's only 50,000 devices involved in this botnet attack. At the same time, it really packed a punch. This was a record-breaking DDoS attack, and it was able to peak at around 26 million requests per second. And just for reference, the previous record was at 20 million. And it was also similarly impressive that they only needed 50,000 devices to do so. And the way they were able to do this is they kind of focused on the botnet, on the quality of the devices as compared to quantity. You know, a lot of other botnets are usually focusing on these IoT devices. But here this botnet was purposely went after virtual hosts with a lot of CPU and RAM computing resources to make sure that each individual device could send a lot more requests compared to a normal botnet. So moving on to another example that I'm sure you've all heard of by now. This one was around 2016, 2017, but the Mirai botnet. This one was named after the anime Mirai Nikki, and the source code was shared by a person named Anna Senpai through forums quite a few years back. The interesting thing around the Mirai botnet is that it's very easily extensible. Since the source code has gone essentially open source in the malicious network, people have, anytime a new vulnerability comes out, for example, Log4j or Spring4Shell, people can very easily modify the source code of the botnet so that they're able to use these new vulnerabilities to spread easily. And that's why the Mirai botnet has thousands of variants, each variant just being a simple, oh, hey, there's a new vulnerability or 0-day that come out. We can now spread via this vulnerability. The final botnet I just wanted to quickly mention too that I thought was really interesting, again, back maybe 2017, 2018, is the RSOC botnet, named after the user who was distributing it. And this one, they were actually just not using the botnet for crypto mining, DDoS, or like credential stuffing. They were using it to sell the IPs they compromised as a proxy server, which I thought was a really interesting way to use a botnet. That being said, it kind of just gave a quick few examples of some botnets, but if you guys like to name your own bot or like what you would name your own botnet, kind of just like interested to see what you guys come up with. Neil, what are your thoughts about that?
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, what's the typical, kind of methodology behind naming these? And we pick like an adjective and an animal and then a number after it. So maybe like, fierce capybara, because I like those. It's the largest rodent in the world. Like, and then 22 or something like that. I don't know. What would you go with?
I was a big fan of the Mantis botnet, especially since I'm starting to do a little bit of boxing. So the idea of just like a little punch or a jab. So let's do something like maybe Jabberwocky botnet.
Ooh, Jabberwocky. I like it. I dig it.
Really good. I've been watching a lot of Marvel's movies lately, so I would think of like a Loki bot, a shapeshifter bot would be really interesting. But if you guys have any ideas for botnet names, feel free to enter them in our poll. We'll be ending it shortly and we'll share them out in just a moment. Another aside on the growth of bots, an important thing to note compared to last year is, according to Spam House, between Q3 and Q4 last year, actually the use of botnets has grown 23% just in those 3 months. So it really is an interesting aside that the use of bots is continuing to stay prevalent, even though the concept has been around for quite a while. So with that, let's take a step back and let's talk a little bit more about those common botnet attacks. Neil, I'm sure that your experience in the field has probably have you come against quite a few.
Yeah, I mean, you hit it on the head. Like, they're around and they're around to stay, right? And like, we continue to see bots and we're going to continue to see them in the future, just because it's a little bit of the ability to test a bunch of input with check catching and parsing all various and all varieties of output. So if we can kind of shotgun a bunch of requests at a large scope, and we can say, all right, well, what came back? And so that's what kind of a lot of like scanning bots are doing. They're going to say like, all right, hey, we know that maybe this vulnerability exists, or maybe this payload, if it returns back something that looks like this type of response, we're going to say, okay, we can do a little bit more crafty attack, or maybe we're going to edit our bot and be a little bit more focused on that scope. And so it gives the ability for people to really cast a wide net and say, all right, let's go ahead and find where areas of interest exist for further attacks. And that's kind of the cusp of like the scanning, bots that you see kind of on a regular basis. And not all scanning bots are actually even like necessarily bad. Like, Google runs a bot as well that'll go ahead and, parse all of the things in your website for, backlinked content, things like that, which kind of helps with like SEO results. So, not all bad bots are, malicious, but, it's just kind of like, they're not going away either. And so it's kind of understanding what they're used for and, how we might leverage them. So we kind of are really good at catching, me and Jake in the SOC here at catching typical standard scanning bot attacks, or ones that are just doing things that might be credential stuffing, or like kind of the ones that Sid was speaking about earlier, like sniping up sneakers as they come out. You've probably all had like an eBay bid that's been sniped right at the last second, right? So like we're really good at like sniffing out those bots and blocking those based off of some parameters. And we really kind of look for those in a variety of ways. If we don't mind going to the next one. Yeah. So what we do is we really kind of parse through, an HTTP request, and we kind of look for indicators of particular areas that might be indicative of an attack, or that might remain static by a particular bot service. Sometimes it's a user agent, a TLS fingerprint, certain parameters that they forget to enumerate through, or the downstream responses through that as well. Similarly, we kind of can look at things like, okay, typically somebody's not going to go directly to a buy it now page. They're going to view other things in the application first, and then go, add it to their cart and then buy now. So if somebody's trying to do things like a card runner, things like that, we can, evaluate their flow within an application as well. So what we do is we kind of look for, those indicators in HTTP requests that are behavioral, that say like, hey, this guy's probably an attacker. Or this is like anomalous. So let's go ahead and increase the risk score on that, and perhaps block it.
I think another side that's really interesting in bots is, a lot of bots aren't just being used in the actual attack phase. There's a lot of bots that are also being used in like the information gathering phase, right? Like scraping organizations' websites to see what public APIs they have available, or just like using common names and API fuzzing to see what API requests come back as like 200. And then once they get a good idea around what actually exists, then they can start to create that more sophisticated attack. So it is kind of this shift in paradigm that bots don't have to just be the thing that's exploiting or specifically targeting data. They can also be what's being used in the early phase.
Right. No, that's 100% true. And anytime that we're putting out information for public digest, like you were kind of mentioning, like API documentation is a big one. The kind of the one that we allude to on the slide here is like we were putting together ways to identify vulnerable areas in applications so that we could patch them and fix them. Anytime something like that is available, it's going to be weaponized, right? Through a bot typically, to go ahead and say, all right, how can I use this? How can I see what this API is going to give me back? Is it going to give me 200 responses? Can I see what data it gives me back, and kind of enumerate through it and glean it all, capture it, and put it somewhere for other availability use? So, kind of along those lines, anytime, you have something out there, know that it's going to be perhaps misused or try to be abused at some, point in the development phases.
And if we're missing any specific topics as far as, the recon phase of bot activity, again, please feel free to post those questions via the Q&A, and we'll make sure to incorporate them as we're walking through this session. So
absolutely. Yeah, this is an area that we like to geek out on quite a bit. So, I mean, if there are areas of interest to others or things that we've missed that we'd like to collaborate on, definitely post those in the chat, and we can talk a little bit further and deeper about them.
Yeah, and on that note, now that we've talked a little bit about how bots can be used in recon, how we should be looking at bot activity at the request level, let's dive a little bit deeper into what are some of the more advanced bot attacks that you guys are seeing on the front lines.
Sure. Yeah. We like to call them low and slow bot attacks. You want to unpack that a little bit, Jake?
Yeah, so low and slow is the bane of stopping botnets. And the reason being is, a lot of like your traditional attacks, whether it's just like a DDoS or maybe you're coming across a credential stuffing attack, right? The attackers kind of just like flip on a floodgate, and all of a sudden you're seeing a huge increase of IPs trying to reach your servers and, either DDoSing you or trying to get login credentials. So traditionally it was really easy to kind of spot that anomalous activity and then block it. But nowadays we're seeing a lot more of this slow attacks where they're using a wide range of distributed IPs, and each one is only doing one request, like maybe a minute or maybe even 5 minutes, and they look like legitimate requests, but they're there for the goal of trying to like steal some credentials
through accounts or something,
exactly. And because of the slow frequency of these attacks too, it can be pretty hard to detect and block.
Well, and similarly, like if they are leveraging an API that exists. So, some of the ones that we see on, a regular basis leverage like a mobile application with an API backend, right? And because they've captured that request from the mobile, application to the origin server, they're just replaying that, but very slowly across like, millions of nodes. So we're kind of like, okay, how do we detect which ones are good, which ones are bad? Like, if they're just rolling through credentials, what gets really difficult for us is, okay, is this somebody failing to log in legitimately using the mobile application? Or is this actually like one of the nodes that's just enumerating through like some captured credentials that I got off of like Pastebin or something?
Yeah, and another kind of clever thing that they're doing too. And again, this is kind of like one of like the first layers, or like how the defense is evolving and the attacks are evolving with it, is like for like some businesses who are only doing business in certain areas or certain regions, like oftentimes geo blocking was kind of like touted as one of the solutions too. But some botnet attackers, and I've seen it happen live, is where they'll realize a certain section, like certain countries, continents, or regions are getting blocked, and you can see them swap those IPs off and move to IPs where the requests are getting through too. And I think that's another like just really interesting capability that the botnets have nowadays.
Yeah, I think it's just like, the evolution of them in that terms of the arms race, right? Like, if they're casting a wide enough net, then they're, having a multitude of, geolocations and ASNs that are covered, right? And then as, they're seeing, bad responses or blocked responses from some of their nodes, and then like valid requests from other ones are like, okay, well, what's, they're doing the same pattern matching that we are. Like, okay, what are the things that are getting through? And then they're going to target more there. And we're like, okay, what are the things that they're now like shifting resources for? So it really does play into that arms race of like, okay, how do we find and detect these, bad bots, right?
I think it's also really interesting that a lot of bot traffic is mirroring normal looking traffic, right? And a lot of those times, that normal or that spike in normal looking traffic is actually disguising the exploitation attempts that are happening. So like, yes, your SOC team might be trying to mitigate a million to tens of million request botnet attack, but really it's those 1 to 2 really specific requests hitting an already known endpoint that was discovered during a recon phase that's actually causing these data breaches to happen.
Truth. Yeah. Like that's definitely some of the scariest bits, right? If you're using a botnet to create like gray noise within the application so that you're effectively kind of going low behind all of that gray noise to do a even more manual, well-crafted attack, then that can effectively be kind of like the smoke cover for you. So we really try to key in on all of those particular differentiators, and it just becomes really hard sometimes. Yeah, it's definitely like the area that is the most difficult in terms of bot mitigation, detection.
Yeah, exactly. And on top of that, it's crazy to think that customizing a botnet or creating your own botnet is actually now a service that's provided on the dark web.
Well, yeah, I mean, it started out like, as somebody would request like a new Metasploit module, right? So like, kind of like what Jake was talking about with the Meraki bot, right? As things there are slowly, come to, availability of like testing for it, you can expand it using that bot to go ahead and, find it, in a multitude of places across, the available internet. And so that's kind of where it started, is as in like, okay, can we have a new Metasploit module for this? Well, of course, like we're going to use it for security testing and researching, but of course, like also, bad attackers are going to use it to leverage in their bot attacks as well, to find where they might be able to leverage that known exploit or vulnerability. And now it's more along the lines as you're pointing out that, hey, we know of a vulnerability or perhaps something that could be leveraged in a particular target or a set of technologies, tech stack in general. And can you build us a bot for this?
Yeah, there's a interesting economy that's almost like sprung up around this concept where like, for like companies, they have the bug bounties where you can report a bug or like some critical flaw and, the companies will reward it for you. Malicious actors almost have a similar thing where if you can report to them like a 0-day or something like that, they have bounties on that as well so that they can perform like devastating attacks.
Well, it's really interesting to see what the audience has come up with so far. I just launched a poll around what exactly is everybody experiencing today, just from the audience perspective. And it seems like there's a mix of many different botnets that they're seeing, but there's also an equal amount of folks saying that they're not able to even detect or see these attacks coming in. So I do think it's really important just to reiterate, the fact that these botnets, they're low, they're slow, they're strategic, mirroring normal looking traffic. Those distributed botnets are cycling IPs to change the location, avoiding geo-blocking, like Neil had just mentioned, and ultimately using bot traffic to create distractions is all part of the sophistication that's starting to be designed into these attacks. So we've talked a lot about, these really complex attack types with bots. Again, if anybody has any questions or think that we might have missed a specific technique, please feel free to post a question in the Q&A and we'll make sure to answer it. But now that we've talked a little bit about, the advanced attacks, let's talk a little bit about how are we actually stopping them. So I'll turn it back over to yourself, Neil or Jacob, to take us away.
I think this is going to be a little bit of both of us because, we both kind of have to have our hands at the helm on occasions because, it really does take both minds or, the hive mind of the SOC and all of the security researching community to block a lot of these, bad guys and attackers, right? I mean, in the end, we're all kind of in it together trying to stop the bad guys in the attack. So, we really do collaborate, use whatever threat feeds and information we can find, within the community, as well as whatever research that we can find so that we can, share it out as well. Because it is an arms race and, we're constantly trying to stop these things. The first thing we really do kind of focus in on is that behavioral based detection. Like the more that we kind of have a baseline or understand what normal is, the easier it is for us to detect things that are abnormal. Now abnormal doesn't always mean there's an attack though, right? Like it could just be somebody fat fingered something. There was a misconfiguration on an endpoint. There's a multitude of reasons. So it's really being able to pick those out and then investigate them or have like other means of the behavioral ways to say like, oh, okay, well, this is definitely somebody trying like X, Y, and Z payload. This is a log4j payload because it has a JNDI lookup in it. Things like that, especially with like it's an application that doesn't even leverage those. So, kind of being able to have a baseline, knowing what the technology stack is, understand what's like a little bit behaviorally normal is going to give us a better idea of like picking out the things that are anomalous and therefore likely risky.
Yeah, you mentioned this. Yeah, I was gonna say you mentioned previously too, like enforcing like a user flow or something with APIs, and that's another like strong area within the behavior where if they go to a login and then they reach the home page and then a user does X, Y, and Z, that's normal to us. Whereas if we see someone doing a login once every 5 minutes or their like behavior just doesn't replicate something the actual traffic should be doing, that's another great way to kind of like spot those anomalous behaviors and then get someone to investigate them.
Couldn't have said it better myself, Jacob.
Sorry for cutting you off there.
Oh no, I was exactly just going to say the same thing. I think also when engineering and security can start to come together to share the insight around what is normal, I think that's when really, there's been this vision of SecOps in cybersecurity for 10 years.
Is that the flavor we're using now?
That's the flavor we're using now, apparently. Okay. Yeah, but that's really, it's starting to come together. So I can't emphasize enough also, like it helps to understand what's normal with documentation. Use API specification files, document all of your APIs and what type of traffic to expect for them. Do you have a new endpoint that's not completely built out yet and that it's normal to see 400 or 500 requests, even though that's not ideal? note it down so that your security team understands that that's expected.
Yeah, the more monitoring and things like that that you have set up, it's always going to be, in your better interest, right? So if you know like that, okay, we have this kind of baseline amount of traffic. I mean, even if you launch a marketing campaign and it spikes up, okay, you at least can correlate that through the communication as you put through like a lot of different ways. Maybe it's, okay, we see this spike. Okay, can we tie it back to like, we just launched a sale on our website, buy all the sneakers, right? So something like that, it's cool, great. We know why it happened. But if all of a sudden it's anomalous, it's like 2 a.m., it's all coming from these weird sources. Okay, well, then what's going on? What are they really after here? And that's kind of where, the more monitoring, the more kind of, protection that you have in place up front, the better, right? That's kind of like where we sit at ThreatX is kind of cool, because we recognize that, pretty much anything that we're putting in place and like mitigating in terms of attack, whether it be bot or, malicious attacker that's manual, everything that these bots that are kind of after is either like trying to find a vulnerability typically or exploit a vulnerability that exists in the application. And so like we know that we can kind of block that at our level and mitigate that, but effectively, like we're merely one step, that first protection to apply, like you said, the feedback loop with the engineers to put in the correct full remediation guidance and full fix into their applications. So that's kind of like, have your protections and first know what your mitigation strategies are, know what normal is so that you can baseline it, find things and put the eyes in the right area. And that's really going to help you a lot. And then have that kind of collaborative process with the other stakeholders within like your whole SDLC, so that you can have like the feedback loop of, all right, hey, we understand that perhaps, this brand, like the most recent big, 0 day was the Log4j example. Hey, we understand we may be vulnerable to this. So can you block this at the WAF in your particular strategic, area to mitigate into a potential exploit right here? And that's going to give us time to put in the necessary patching, make the correct code fixes, things like that on the engineering side. So that collaborative discussion is paramount to ensuring that you're really secure.
Yeah, the last thing that I'd reiterate there is that, with these attacks changing, it's really important to continuously revisit and revise your current infrastructure and your current solutions, right? Like these attacks are going to be changing. So how you protect against them should have a similar mindset.
Right. And document it, right? If you're making those changes, make it part of like a very mature change management process, so that you know what things to expect and out of date. And then if you have stakeholders that are using old infrastructure, you can say, hey, here's the new documentation. And then it helps you again get back to a new baseline, so that you can identify people who might be using out-of-date technology for attacks or things that maybe shouldn't exist anymore. And so therefore, like having the right version controls and the right inventory of your APIs of like what calls, what endpoints, things like that are no longer available to customers or to outside users, and what is available now, so you can again find that those anomalies.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite examples working with some of our customers was being able to prevent abuse of entering in credit card numbers. When we're entering in numbers of different variations of credit card numbers, and they're not working, for that application provider, you're starting to drive up their transaction costs, because even though they aren't going through, it still requires those services to be able to try to process them. So that's a real life implication of not being able to block against a botnet attack, is really that uptick of transaction fees.
Yeah, I think I know the one that you're talking about. And, it became a little bit of like the evolution. Like we saw them using some very silly things on the onset, like using user agents that had versions in them that didn't exist. So we were able to block them really easily on using that. But then of course they evolved, like as we've talked about, and we ended up having to institute kind of like some of our more advanced techniques of like monitoring flows. Like very unlikely somebody's going to go directly and just try to run a credit card like directly to the API or directly to an endpoint. They're likely going to surf, view various products, do some other things before they would do that. Similar use is like they're not going to use the same person's not going to be logged in to try to run a credit card in like 10 different locations around the globe at once. So little things like that you can key in on to help block those types of nefarious users.
Well, we're coming up on the last few minutes of the session. Of course, we want to be respectful of everybody's time. If there's any last minute questions, this is your chance to shout them out, post them in the Q&A. We'll make sure to answer them before we hop off with you today. One quick takeaway as well is if you'd like to talk to ThreatX more about API protection, bot mitigation, DDoS protection, we'll be at Black Hat. We're also having Corey Ball, the author of Hacking APIs, join us. He'll be doing book signings. And we really hope to see some friendly and familiar faces from the crowd at the conference. So
yeah, if you're in Black Hat, definitely swing by, say hi. I would love to talk.
Well, we certainly appreciate the time with everybody today. I don't see any new questions coming in. So again, we appreciate your time today, and don't miss out on the next live Q&A. We're also going to be having Corey come on with us to answer live questions from the audience as well. So we'll make sure to share out time so you can mark it in your calendar soon.